How's it, guys? I'm Kate, and I'm an alcoholic.
Okay.
I'm shitting myself, I have to be honest. I'm really, really fearful, I suppose. The thing that's worrying me the most is that nothing that I will say will kind of express how not only grateful, but what this program has done for me. You know, my life was a mess, a big mess, and completely unmanageable. And, you know, what the 12 steps and my sponsor and God and this fellowship and what it's done for me is just, I can't put it into words, you know. It's really quite incredible. I suppose when it gets to these shares, I always hear how people have pivotal moments in their life where they really thought to themselves that they were possibly alcoholic or had a problem, and I can't say that I ever did. I really thought that I had my life in control, which is just crazy because it really wasn't, you know. And I don't have a specific story that I can say that I really thought to myself in that moment that that I had a problem. I suffered from a lot of guilt and shame after binges, and I would make sincere kind of commitments to myself that I wouldn't ever drink again. But my disease manifested in behaviors, and that I do remember. I remember my behavior starting as, you know, a young girl, and that my thinking patterns were never normal. I always thought that the world was against me, and that kind of anything that anyone ever did for me or any achievement that I got was ever good enough. You know, I always felt that I was exceptionally hard done by in life, which is the irony behind it, because I'm not hard done by at all. I come from an exceptionally strong and loving family. I've had a good education that my parents sacrificed to send me to. I've had a good life, you know, and for that's why I know that I was born this way. I was born alcoholic, and nothing that anyone ever did to me made me who I am today, you know. I come from a family of 4 children. My parents didn't get that remark, the contraceptive. And my biological dad, I believe from the stories that I've been told, was alcoholic. I've been told that he was an exceptionally loving man, but that this disease made him make some really silly mistakes, you know. My mom left him 2 weeks after my brother was born and moved into my grandparents' house, where the grandfather that I live with now, which is incredible because I think that's God in itself, you know. I've kind of gone back to my roots and started life over again. Recovery's given me a new start, you know. My relationship with my siblings has always been hard because of my thinking. I've always felt that I was worse off than them or not good enough to kind of, I don't know, like that they were always better than me, you know. My mom remarried when I was about 5 to an incredible father, but our relationship has been hard because of my thinking around it. I've always kind of thought that he's loved my other siblings more, which is crazy. My brother's genetically exactly the same as me. He chose to adopt both of us. But I've always felt that he wouldn't accept me, you know. And that's completely not how he's treated me ever. My brother's relationship and I has been exceptionally testing at times because of my jealousy problems. I'm exceptionally jealous of his lifestyle. He's a professional rugby player, and I've always felt that my family gave him the limelight, and nothing I ever did would set up to that standard. And so my behavior came out in being louder than what I naturally am, or trying to find solace in humor that didn't even make sense at times, you know. because if I was misbehaving, then at least I'd get some form of attention. My support in rugby stadiums became fairly barbaric at times. At the time, I thought that I was being the best supporter, but in fact, I was crushing my brother. And it really, really affected our relationship. Now, it's getting better. It's still a work in progress, but it gets better, and I'm trying to put the effort into it, My parents had 2 children who are my sisters. And, my fight for my acceptance from my brother has, I kind of didn't notice my younger 2 sisters. I always used to give myself this pat on the back that I was this exceptionally good sister, and I can honestly tell you that I missed their lives up until a year ago, I didn't know what they were going through. I didn't know, I just really wasn't part of their life. I was too consumed by what I needed to do to be happy, My happiness was depicted by what I could achieve in life. And so from an early age, my fix at that time became sport. But if I didn't achieve a certain amount, if I didn't swim the fastest race or get the time that I needed, I'd give up. Because for me, if I didn't get to that point, then I'd failed, It was the same behavior in high school. I wasn't naturally very clever. I had to work hard to be able to just pass, and I was very embarrassed about that. I'll never forget when I did my life story in the treatment facility that I went to. I literally went to the dictionary and found words that I actually didn't know the meaning of, because if I seem more clever, then I think that you're going to accept me more, and English isn't a strong point for me. So I'll use a dictionary and land up looking silly anyway, because I'm using words in the wrong sentence. In high school, I arrived fairly chubby, and I grew exceptionally tall, quite fast. And with that came losing weight, and I loved it, because the more weight I lost, the more attention I got. And I loved getting the attention, and especially in high school, from the girls, because I never really ever related to girls. Growing up with a brother who was my best friend in early stages, I kind of had an identity problem where I wanted to be a boy, but I was a girl, and my coping skills was to be rougher than a female. So when it got to arguments with females, I'd kind of just want to slap them and not discuss anything, I really found it difficult to be in high school. I was in an all-girls school, and it was hard for me. So when this attention came for losing weight, I really, really liked it. And my behavior around food with that stuff became quite sick. I got a lot of relief from not eating, which was my control. I could control what I could consume or what I couldn't consume, Then obviously I got called out being in high school, and I would find the next fix, which would become sport again. It was always about replacing something outside of myself to feel better. I actually started drinking only when I was about 19, because I was so consumed by my weight. I was more worried about putting on weight, drinking, than starting to drink. But then when I did start, it gave me a whole different outlook on life. I had confidence. I wasn't as fearful as I was going into crowds. But more than anything, my gran asked me yesterday if there was how did I feel when I had my first drink? And I don't think I can recall that either. But what I do remember about drinking was that I'd stop thinking. It was like my world was quiet for a while, and that's what meetings give to me now. The world just stops for a little bit when I'm in meetings, and it stops that chaos in my head. After school, I got my first serious boyfriend, and we both happened to be moving to London, which was where, again, my drinking wasn't a big issue because I had a boyfriend. And the more I could do for him, the better I'd feel. And if he was around, I was fine, I worked in an all-boys school in London, and I loved it. That's where I found my passion for teaching. And I suppose that was where God was already playing his role in where my life would land up, because I've got I love working with children and teaching in any form. When I got back from London, I was exceptionally lost. I didn't know what I wanted to study, and for me, again, I found solace in what I could achieve next. If I didn't have a goal point at where my happiness would lie, then I didn't have any meaning to life. And so I started a Bachelor of Education, and that became my fix. The more I studied, the better I felt. The more I worked, the better I felt. And if I wasn't working or studying, I would have to drink. Again, not wanting to ever sit still or be with me. I was exceptionally fearful of ever being just alone, My boyfriend and I split up, and I started dating my best friend from high school, who also a very, very sick situation, because it was kind of like, now in hindsight, I don't think at the time, but in hindsight, I believe that it was planned. His dad and my biological dad were best friends, and I loved that. I thought it was like a fairy tale story that my mom knew my ex-husband when he was little, and that we'd grown up together, and that my biological dad knew him, and in my eyes, my dad accepted him, so I did anything to make sure that I kept him. For me, that was going to be happiness. If I married my ex-husband, we were going to be happy, we were going to have a house, we were going to have children, and then I was definitely going to be happy, And yeah, I'll get to it later, but it didn't turn out so well. Throughout my studying, I kind of can recall moments of having serious binges and knowing that I couldn't stop. I'd go to a party and I'd have, it was never one or two drinks. I had to drink to pass out or land up doing something really silly, I was incapable of stopping. What I was capable of doing was not using, but then my behavior was just either very controlling or obsessively working, or, at one stage I even fixed off baking, If there's anything that I can use to get out of myself, I'll do it. Sports, baking, painting, anything, My ex-husband and I ended up moving overseas, and I think that's when my disease really, really progressed. Although I've always felt not part of my family, only because of my thinking, it's always been a comfort zone being in my family. It's what I'm used to. My family's very loving. And so when I was overseas, I really didn't feel part of anything, really. And my disease manifested definitely in working a lot. At some points, I was juggling 3 or 4 jobs because that made me feel better. That made me feel that my husband would accept me more. And I love the affirmation. Any job that I have, if I work harder and my boss says how well I'm doing, then I'll keep doing more, And I pushed my husband away because of that. My self-reliance is one of my biggest character defects, and it comes for me even in recovery. I battle to ask for help. I think that I can do it on my own, and I think now in recovery I've learned that was one of my most hurtful things with my family, was that I never ever sat down and said, sure, I'm broken, or I'm struggling with this, or I never did. I never ever asked for help, ever, in active. My husband eventually had an affair after, I suppose, also being so lonely from my behavior. I working hard, I was studying at the same time too. When I discovered that he had an affair, my world literally crashed, because for me, that was not my plan. My plan was to have the house and the kids and this husband who my biological family knew, who my dad liked, who my mom had changed his nappies for, who was an accountant, because that's really good. So like I just really, my world crashed, And my coping mechanism was to, within 3 weeks, pack up and leave an island that I'd been living on for 4 years and run. And I didn't decide to come home. I decided to run to Malawi, because Malawi was going to help me, because at that stage, my ex-husband was the problem, my binge drinking was the problem, the medication that I was on was the problem, so I'm going to go and find a cure in Malawi. And I didn't. My behavior became more shocking, more hurtful, and exceptionally angry person. I was very, very angry at God, and in the midst of all of this, I was really hurting my mom and dad, because I never asked for help. I never spoke to my siblings. I became very isolated. Isolating was something that I'd become very good at in high school. When I wasn't coping with life, I would sit for hours on end writing these diaries that I don't know what I was trying to write about, but it took my thinking onto paper, and it didn't have to be in my head anymore, It made me feel better for a little while. Malawi didn't work out so well, and I landed up in, I find it hard to even say that it's a treatment facility, but I landed up in a place where it was great. I went for horse riding, and I went sun tanning, and I found another man, and my life was good, because this man and his 2 children were going to make me feel better, and I learned how to take prescription medication, and I was cured. So I left the facility, and 8 months after that was just a disaster. I would go to work and run back to my house out of fear of seeing anyone that I hadn't seen or that knew that what was going on, because I didn't want to expose that I'd recently been divorced, that I couldn't go out because alcohol was my problem. I was literally fearful of living. I didn't know, I'd lost the ability to even communicate, really. Going to the shops was a huge thing for me. To leave the house in case of who I was going to bump into or what I was going to see was it was an incredible fear, And so for 8 months I did that. I ran to work. I was swimming instructing at the time. I'd run back home and I'd hide. And then I had this boyfriend at the time that I could solve all his problems, because I'd met him in this treatment facility, so he also had problems, and I would save him and his children. And sure, what I realized now, it was so selfish what I did, I involved 2 children's lives in a really sick way, I used them to make myself feel better. One of my biggest happiness sort of points has been that when I have kids, I'll definitely be happy, and it didn't work out that way, because it didn't go towards my plan, The day before I landed up into the treatment facility that I did, I had literally given up on life. I didn't know what to do anymore, you know. None of my self-commitments to myself of not ever drinking again was going to work. Controlling my food wasn't working for me anymore. Painting wasn't working. Nothing was helping me anymore, you know. I've had this massive fear about death my whole life, which I'd never exposed up until recovery. I suppose, you know, out of embarrassment that you don't... I never wished to die, but I was fearful of dying, you know. I used to, on a daily basis, think of at least 2 or 3 times throughout the day of how I was going to die and where I was going to go and what it was going to be about, you know. And my reality is that the day before getting into the treatment facility was, I really was wishing to die. I'd given up on absolutely everything and anything, and I didn't want to live anymore, you know. What I didn't realize was that actually a year before me going into the treatment facility, my mom had already received help from someone in this community here and was able to give me tough love, the love that I needed. I didn't understand it at the time, and you know, that's about family really setting aside how they feel to help me, you know. They didn't take me on holidays anymore. They didn't phone me as much as they did. And what I didn't realize was at the time was that they were just literally having sleepless nights waiting on when they were going to get the phone call of I've either driven into someone or I've hurt someone, or what my final point was going to be, and I got to it. You know, I gave up the day before I went into the treatment facility. My boyfriend at the time, luckily, called my parents, and within a few hours, they came to collect me and take me to the treatment facility that I went to, you know. Sure, when I arrived there, I was exceptionally angry. I was angry at God. I didn't want to live anymore, and I was just angry, you know. Nothing had gone to my plan, and nothing that I ever did or tried had helped me, you know, and poor me, you know. My first 3 months in treatment, I battled to say that I was in recovery because, I don't know, I only think that I started coming to reality slightly in my 3rd month of being in treatment. Within 3 days, I did what I always do. I pretend, you know. I wore masks. I acted like everything was okay and so much fun, and living with 6 people in a room was fun. And I used the spiritual duties that they have in the house to make me feel better. So the more that I did to get out of myself, the better I felt, or the funnier I could be, the better I felt, or, you know. And then being in a house full of people like me, they got my number, you know. And I went through 4 weeks of concern groups, and it was hectic. I literally felt like I was dying. I felt like, you know, my skin was getting pulled off. It was the most incredible pain of the reality of who I was, you know, or who I am. Exposure is huge for me. I'm exceptionally fearful of telling people of who I really am, you know. And what I've come to realize now was what caused the most pain was my biggest gift. You know, I'm exceptionally grateful for the people who at the time were in the house that I was in, because if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be where I'm at now, you know. I had to look for a slight bit of hope in the counselors that were in the treatment facility, because I couldn't see how I was going to ever live a life that involved happiness or normality or manageability at all, you know. I literally had to choose one element from each counselor that I thought I could maybe achieve. I could maybe achieve a little bit of the humor that someone had, or I wanted the relationship that a particular counselor had with God. I literally had to choose one thing that I would get from that I could achieve from each counselor, and pray that it was sort of going to work out for me. In my 3rd month, when I knew that I was 100% alcoholic, was when I broke a mirror. I'd been warned about a mirror in our room that used to hang up on the top of a fireplace. And a guy who has been in recovery for a while used to come to the house on weekends, and he came and he said to me, Kate, you've been here for the longest. If that mirror comes off that fireplace and is put on the fireplace shelf again, you're the one who's going to be responsible. Now, I'm 6 foot, so I don't have to move the mirror because the girls were moving it to put their makeup on, And I was so irritated with this guy when he told me, and I was like, okay, sure. And I was sitting on the toilet the one day, and this bloody mirror broke. And I promise you, within 3 seconds, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I was either going to run, I was going to sweep the glass under the cupboard, or I was just going to lie and blame them. Blame the other girls in the room, because, it's not me. And I don't know, I did something differently that day, I walked outside, I found someone who was volunteering at that time, and I said, you need to take me to the owner of this treatment facility right now, or I'm going to lie. And I walked into the office, and I said to him, Keith, the mirror broke. And he literally said, okay, my girl, we'll order another one. And I was floored. I was floored that honesty was so easy and that there wasn't a consequence to it, because my entire life, I've run on fear that I could never be honest. I'd take any story and either add things to it or take something away from it, exaggerate, because nothing from that story would be good enough. If it was funnier or more extreme or more dramatic, then it was going to be more appealing to the people around me, And I suppose that was when I kind of realized that being an alcoholic is my thinking, and my thinking was what my behavior followed from my thinking, and I have a choice to either be honest or lie about it and get myself into a mess, So the house called me on my stuff and took my spiritual duties away from me, and for 3 months I wasn't allowed to do anything extra other than be with myself and try and get through try and deal with it, and it was hurtful. It was definitely not the easiest experience, What's the time? Okay. After leaving the house, I didn't have a leaving date or anything like that, and it was definitely God working in my life, because if I have a date, I kind of obsess over it so much to get to that point that I miss things that are happening in my life, My grandparents asked me to house sit, and I hid it from my sponsor for 2 or 3 days, because they were never going to allow me to house sit. And when I told my sponsor and she said yes, I was absolutely floored yet again. So I left the house and went and house sat, and I started working. Coming out of treatment, I've never looked for a job. I've always got jobs through people in the fellowship. I've either always worked with someone in the fellowship or literally someone from the fellowship has got me my job, I now, in recovery, own my own Pilates studio, which is just my most incredible gift. I run it with someone else in the fellowship, and I love it. I love the fact that I'm with people and I can teach them. I'm able to expose my stuff to them about recovery. I can be honest about who I am, and it's accepted. I think one of the best choices I ever made was to stay in this community. It's the first time in my life that I call a place home, you know. I've never had friends the way that I do now who literally carry me when I'm battling to walk. You know, I've got an incredible amount of gratitude for the friends that I have today. My relationship with my family is completely different. I live with my grandparents, which is, it was meant to last 3 months, and I think the home-cooked meals are too good. Yeah, you know, I've got so much gratitude for that, because the alcoholic that I am, I need to be around people all the time. I need to be in a community that is so proactive about recovery. One of my greatest gifts is that I get to do service at the treatment facility that I was in every Sunday, and I love it. I very seldomly wake up on a Sunday with the feelings that I had for my whole life. Sundays were my worst days of, I don't know why, of every week. I don't know if it's that boarding school feeling, but I used to hate Sundays, and now I love them. I love my service, and I love being able to go and touch base at the place where that got me into these rooms, you know. I have a relationship with my brother, which is testing at times. I mean, I had a good streak the other day where it reminded me of how alcoholic I am. He phoned me to tell me that he was pregnant, all his wife is, and I was riddled in jealousy. Like, I was absolutely flawed. I was jealous, and why not me? You know, but the difference is now I get to phone my sponsor and expose how I'm feeling honestly, and she gets to give me the truth, you know. I don't have to have that internal battle anymore. When I choose to use her, sometimes I don't, and I sit in pain, and I feel sick, you know. Yeah, I think that's about it. I don't think I'll ever be able to express how grateful I am for everything that I have in my life now. It's an exceptionally happy life 99% of the time when I don't overcomplicate it, you know. When I keep it simple and I stick to my self-discipline and get to the meetings that I'm meant to be at and say and be where I say I'm going to be, I'm happy, you know. It's not a goal point anymore. It's every day, you know. I've been very privileged to be able to make indirect amends in my early days of recovery, where I have worked with children, because throughout my teaching career I've used. So in recovery I can do it differently, you know. I can try and practice patience and acceptance, because children aren't, I love them, but they aren't always the easiest, you know. I'm able to teach Pilates. For the person who asked me to start Pilates, I taught for 10 years ago, you know. So it's quite incredible. As I said, I've literally restarted almost at the same roots that I was at, living back at with my grandparents, restarting teaching, you know, but just happy this time round, you know. So, yeah, thank you, everyone. Thanks for letting me share.